What's up, guys? Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about the FPS in World of Warcraft, why it matters, why I'm bringing this out now, really, and kind of the graphics settings that go in with how each play for your FPS. This is also going to be more geared toward the NVIDIA style GPUs, not AMD, because I don't have a Radeon card available. So if you're looking for that, I am sorry, but you could stick around to see if some of these settings still help you out. This is going to be kind of a basic guide as to where everything is. And then at the end, I'm going to kind of explain why I think all of this is good, why it's bad. But before we begin, I want to say thank you guys for watching. It's been a real huge excitement for me going into Shadowlands with the streaming, and now with the recording, and now fixing my computer. Really, for the frames it's getting. I only really started caring about this FPS because my computer back in Old Deer and Warlords, back in Old Deer and Battle for Drazhar lore in this expansion, I would be getting 30, 40 FPS, not really higher than that, and I could never understand why until about 2 or 3 days ago. So, without further ado, let's get into this. It's going to be a long one, so buckle up. Yeah. So, we're going to start off by hitting escape, going to system, going to your graphics tab, and then I'm going to start with anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing improves image performance. That's really all it does, improves the quality of the image that you see on your screen. Having this on none is a huge performance boost, FPS boost really. If I set this to MSAA times 8, a lot of the jagged edges that we see will disappear, but your frames also will drastically decrease. If you want the best of both worlds, I would say go to FXAA high or CMAA if your system can handle it. I usually just leave this off because, quite frankly, if you want to see the smoothest of the game, you're not going to be raiding. You're not going to be a dungeon where time stuff is. You're going to be questing, probably laid back looking at scenery, that type of thing. So turning this off is a huge FPS boost. Vertical sync. What is VSync? So capping your FPS to your monitor's refresh rate. Also, if you see screen tearing or like ghosting effects, that can, if enabling this can reduce those. But why is this bad? So VSync makes your entire game sit at 60, 120, 144, whatever your monitor's refresh rate is. But it has to sit there and tax your CPU and your GPU until it hits that. So disabling this increases your FPS insanely, because if you can have, say, over 60 or over 140, right, you'll get it. But it also increases your system's performance. So, like, if you're, say, you have VSync on, or off, sorry, and your system maybe sits at like 30 or 40 utilization, you turn VSync on, it can go 50, 60, sometimes 70, it'll tax your system kind of heavily. So, leave that up to you. Turning it off does increase performance. Now we're going to come down to texture resolution. So, the reason we're here at the Dalaran Crater isn't mostly because of my FPS, but is to show the generalized spells and why. So texture resolution, what is this? Quality of buildings, characters, higher for more detailed, slight FPS increase. So the building, for the example, this rune on the ground, if I come to system and I set this to low, you're going to instantly see, hey, this blurs out, right? So it blurs the building. It even will blur my character a little bit. but it'll blur the textures on the mount too. So watch what happens if we change this to fair. You start to see generalized textures up close on your character on the player mount. You start to see more textures on the runes. And if I increase this to high, you're going to get everything. You're going to get more detailed textures. Here, you're going to get every little detail on your mount, that type of thing. Spell density. So, this is new to pre-patch coming into Shadowlands. What does spell density do? Visibility of non-essential spells. So, anything that Blizzard doesn't deem essential, which, quite frankly, I wouldn't leave this to Blizzard's side. I'd leave it more to us. So, like a Shaman Spirit Totem, where everybody has to jump in, that's an essential spell. Your spells can sometimes be considered essential spells. Leaving this on dynamic is based on the target FPS, which I will get into later, but it's based on that target capping of FPS. Leaving this on everything, doesn't matter if your FPS is 500, it's going to show every spell in the game, doesn't matter what. Somewhere in the center, so if we click on this between essential and everything, it's going to show in the middle of all of that. I would personally leave this on dynamic. You're not going to see a lot of performance drop, and I'll tell you why later. Projected textures. So decals on walls, enhanced runes, disable for more performance. Not really interested in anything. This used to, and this is why we're at the Dalaran Crater, this used to disable, enable this middle rune here. So it doesn't really do much now. It shouldn't increase graphics on the logs. So yeah, it doesn't really do much of anything. I would personally just leave this enabled. It's not going to do much to your game. And leave that setting as is. You can disable it for an FPS boost though. View distance. So I have my view distance currently set on 5. Why does that matter? So we bump this to 10. You're not going to see much of a difference here at the crater. If I turn around and I shorten this back to 5, you'll see the stuff back in the distance above my system. It will come up here. We decrease it all the way to 1. The trees start disappearing. So the higher this is, the more your system starts taxing and the less your frames are. If I decrease this back to 5, 5 is like that happy medium between the game going, hey, no, we can live with this, and oh, the system saying, no, just throw more stuff at me. If you want to say raid and dungeons, keeping it on a 5 is fine, because that's like the perfect happy medium as well. It's not going to show too much ahead, it's not going to show too much behind. Environmental detail. So, how far objects can be seen from the player. Why do I have this set at 3? Well, we're at the Dalaran Crater for a reason. Environmental detail set to a 3. You're going to see a few rocks here in the background, right? If I set this all the way to a 10, there's more rocks, right? And if we set this all the way to a 1, you're going to see 1 rock. So, it's really just how much stuff do you want to see on your screen. I think between 3 and 6 is really that happy medium of stuff, because it doesn't truly tax your system until after 5, but I leave it on 3 because that's a generalized, oh hey, there's a little bit of detail here, but it's not going to go overboard and say, hey, I'm going to completely drain all your FPS for the most visual eye candy possible. And now, ground clutter. What is ground clutter? So, it's the grass we see on the ground. So, if we come down here, you see we have a few things here and there. We have a couple of spiders, but I'm high enough level that none of this will hit me. If I increase this all the way to 10, see around me, all of the grass just slowly get bigger. If we throw this all the way to a 1, you're going to see minimalized grass, right? What this also does, if we increase this to a 10 and I scroll out and get off my mount, the grass around your character moves. So if you lower this to a 5, it's obviously going to be less grass moving around your screen. It's going to increase your FPS because there's less movement running around. Now, we go to our shadow quality. What does shadow quality do? Well, it's the level of detail within the shadows. The lower the detail, the more blobbish it looks. The higher the detail, the more outlined it looks. So if we use this building as an example, you see this shadow here in the background. If I set you to low, the shadow is going to completely disappear, and it's going to make the game look like there's no shadows here whatsoever. We set this to fair. It's going to do the same thing. There's going to be slight shadow, so it's going to be very minimal shadows. Good. When we first start seeing the shadows, they're going to be a little jaggedy. High, where I normally leave it, there's definition in the shadow. And then if you really want eye candy at cost of FPS, ultra high, there's no real difference between high and ultra high, to be completely honest. So leaving this on high is the perfect balance between FPS and your graphic fidelity, really. Liquid detail. So, the perfect example of this is just to stand over here next to this pond. I have it set on good, right? So, we can see the snap jaw in the water here. If I turn this to low, it's going to look like Play-Doh. So, there's barely any movement of water here. You can hardly see the snap jaw in the water. It's going to look like there's just a line. This doesn't really decrease performance, but Ultra will decrease your performance. You see there's wave, there's ripple effects. So we jump in the water, you can see the ripple coming out of the water here, right? So this is why I normally just leave it on good. You get the slight ripple effect saying that you're in the water, and you get the slight snap jaw saying, hey, I can see you. It moves around. Sunshafts. So more in a sun-based area. You see the sun right there, kind of hurting my eye a little bit, but if we turn that on, it's not going to really do much, right? So in places with high sunlight, so storm wind before corrupted area, right, where all the sun is, you're going to see a lot of glare. Disabling this drastically increases performance. I don't have a character in Stormwind to show, but it does drastically increase your performance. I can say that for a fact. So just turn that off if you have problems with your FPS. That's probably one of the first things I'd turn off. Sunshafts. Particle density. Particle density plays into how many spells you also see. So spell density, particle density go hand in hand with each other. It's also going to go hand with the target FPS that I'm going to explain later. Particle density is basically what controls like how many spells you see. So if we come over to this mage, I'm on Ultra, so we see all of the spells here, right? If we disable this, there's not a lot of spells. You don't really see much. You see him casting something, right? We change it to like good. You see him slightly casting spells. So if you have to disable this for performance reasons, disable it no lower than good, because this is when you're going to see like shaman spirit totems. So it will do a circle, right? Where you have to go stand in. The shaman spirit totem on good is like a half a circle. So it'll show you half the circle when it spins. On ultra, it's going to show you everything. So that's what I would first disable down to good if you have to. SSAO, so screen space ambient occlusion, as we call that. Adding more shadows shaders to edges, items close to each other. So in the event of you having, say, like this mob having a shadow and the building having a shadow, it's going to try and smooth out those edges that you see. So if I have an object here and an object here and stuff in the middle, it's going to try and smooth in those edges. Disabling that highly increases performance. That's why I have it disabled. There's no real point in it, because enabling this to ultra doesn't really do much. So leaving that off, you see if we look at the tree here, right? I'd enable this all the way to ultra. You see shadows within the tree, just what I was talking about, and shadow on the ground. We lower this to like good, I want to say, right? It's going to show slight shadows, but I just leave this off because there's no real point in seeing those shadows in the trees. Depth effects and outline mode. So depth effects involves field of view shading style. You disable this, it's not really going to do much to your performance. So put that as high as you want. It's not going to really do much. Outline mode. So brand new feature in pre-patch is the questing markers, right? Well, quest markers in WoW are outline mode is targets, so the highlighted targets, which as you see, it's not really easy to see, so we're gonna come down here, right? Oh, he's looking at me funny. And now he's not gonna cast anything. Do I have it? Okay. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. Hi. Right? Alright, it's not showing up on my mage. So, normally when you click over highlighted shadows, or the quest outline mode, it's going to show up like the item here. So we're going to hop on a tune that's got like a gathering profession really quick, and I'll show that to you. I could show it to you on my main, on my warlock. We'll show that. The outline mode. Example. See how he's in blue right now? The player character's in blue. If we disable this, there's no longer that blue shading around the character. This works the same way with any gathering profession, any questing marker. You also go to interface, display, outline mode, and raid self highlight, and select stuff there. So this is where that outline mode goes into play. Moving over to our advanced tab, we have max foreground and max background FPS. So max foreground, if we're in the game, right? So if I log back over to my mage, which has a bigger FPS, so I can show this in a better way. we will see the 170 now, right? If we click on advanced, go to max foreground, and I set this to like, say 60, hit apply, it's going to drop your maximum amount of frames possible to that number, and it won't let it go over it. So if you have problems with frame stuttering, say you have like 180 FPS like I do, and it drops drastically every now and then, enable this, set it to like 5 or 10 over your monitor's refresh rate. So I have a 60 hertz monitor, I'm going to set it to 70, and it's going to sit here at a 70 as long as it holds over 70 frames. Same thing with background FPS. So if you want to say look up like on Wowhead, say where the Dalran crater is, right? So we know it's in Hillsbrad, but if we want to go look it up, if I set this to like 30, right? So it's not going to do anything while you're playing a game, but if I like click on, say, my desktop screen, we'll instantly notice it drops down to 30. I'm actually going to increase this really quick to 60. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get that slider where you want it, but we have 60, right? Click off again. It's going to drop our frames to 60 while we're outside looking at that, and click back on, and it'll bring you back to your game. So useful for looking stuff up if you don't want WoW to hog all your resources. Target FPS. What is target FPS? So target FPS is also new to Shadowlands. Control spells and the dynamic options. System will reduce your spell effects and particle effects to increase performance. So WoW dynamically does this based on the FPS you have set. So you'll notice I have it set to 65. I'm on a 60 hertz monitor, so I don't want anything below 60, right? Setting this to about 5 or 10 above what you want to ideally play at, right? Will, anytime it goes below this number, kill any of the spell effects. So like that Shaman Totem, for example, it will make it go down to like a good setting. And when your game goes over that mark, say 70 now, it will put that Shaman Totem back to its full particle density spell effects. That's what target FPS does. That's why spell effects can be set to dynamic. So keep that on what you want to play at. Triple buffering. Do not click this inside the game. It can lag your system out. It's basically a reducing the spikes in FPS, but greatly increases your input lag. So if you're having issues, say you're spamming like the 1 key and your button doesn't want to go off every time you hit 1, right? Enabling this increases that problem. Disabling this reduces that problem. But disabling this increases frame drop. So if I'm sitting at like 180, right, FPS, if I enable this and I was dropping to say 60 or 70 FPS, enabling this can lower that to like 100 or 120. It'll reduce that lower spiking. Texture filtering goes hand in hand with your texture resolution on the graphics side of things. So if you have this set to high, right, this is basically going to sharpen those images and angles. So if I'm looking at this house from an angle, it's going to sharpen the direction it sees. these jagged lines. It's going to sharpen the trees, that type of thing. Ray trace shadows. Don't turn that on. I don't care if you have a 2080 Ti or a 3090. This literally kills your game by over 50 FPS, and it's funny to watch. While it might look nicer, right? Your game sits at 40, 50 FPS, and it just suffers. So don't even turn it on. MSAA, personally, I leave this at none, but it smooths the appearance of jagged edges. So if you want to increase this, it's not going to really do much to the frames where I'm at right now, because this is an old world zone, but it smooths the coloring out on the edges of the like rocks and stuff. Multi-sampling and MSAA, these two go together. So if you have this on, enable this. If you have this off, disable this. That's all that is. Post-processing AA. So the grass and jagged edges, turn this on if you want eye candy, turn it off if you want FPS. That's all that is. Resample quality. So if you're using resolution scale above 100%, your base monitor, turn this on. If you're not, turn it off. And to explain the bilinear or bicubic, bilinear is a softening technique. Bicubic is a more hard, like precise coloring. So bilinear is going to take two objects at 2 points and smooth those two edges. Bicubic is going to take those two objects and find the more discrete color and put that color in there. Graphics API. So if you have an older system that can't support DirectX 12, which should be very few, but in the event of you having it, there is DirectX 11, Legacy, and 11. This is a system-based. I'm not going to tell you which one to select because maybe 12 would be better for you if it supports it. But more often than not, your system is going to benefit from DirectX 12 if you have a GPU that supports it. Physics interactions. So player and environment, right? Player and NPC or player only. Not a real huge performance loss, really. It controls like waist plate belt swinging, the Gul'dan staff, right? So to kind of show off what it is, we're going to just fly down here, hop on a mount real quick. Don't think I have a staff in bags. I do, but it requires Frost Mage. But for the time being, it will still show what we need. I'm on a Fire Mage. So, example, see the skull bouncing around? That skull is the physics interactions. So, if you want that skull, great. If not, if you want that skull to move around, great. Enable that. If not, set it to none, and it won't move at all. And if you have to take anything, literally anything out of this video, if nothing else has helped you, do this. I'm not even kidding. This jumped my FPS by over 50. So, bear with me here. But, graphics card, if you have a Intel or an AMD CPU that has integrated graphics, make sure WoW is set to your graphics card. Because if you have it set on auto detect, Blizzard might choose your CPU. So if your AMD or Intel chip has integrated graphics, it'll run off your integrated graphics and your FPS will heavily suffer. Setting this to your GPU lets the game force some of the load onto your GPU and lets the game run smoother. But it can only be set on your GPU if we do this. So I'm going to go over to my other screen here, right? And bear with me, but the WoW can only be set, and this is why I said at the beginning of the video, an NVIDIA GPU only. So if we go into our control panel here, and you open it up, it'll open up something like this, right? So NVIDIA does a very good job at being very straightforward on your stuff. But the item we're going to be looking at today is Configure Surround PhysicsX. This shows where you have stuff plugged in, right? But the thing we're going to be looking at is right here. PhysicsX settings. So it's going to processor. Before last week, I had this set on auto select or recommended. And the PhysicsX was controlling by my CPU. I have an i7 6700K. So this was set to CPU of my CPU. So it made WoW run on my CPU. Go figure. Setting this to my GPU, my 1080 GPU, clicking apply, it's going to take a minute or two, right? See, back out of there. And then we turn that off, and this becomes selectable. Select that, reload your game, voila. You now have extremely better FPS. Thank you guys for watching. If I caught something that you guys didn't, or vice versa, if you found something more helpful that I have explained here, please let me know in the comment section below. If you have anything to add, go ahead and, be civil down in the comment section. Don't, be toxic toward people. But thank you guys for watching. I hope we have a fun time in Shadowlands, and have a good one.